It started with a simple stroll, Pedro Pascal walking incognito through the narrow, cobbled streets of an old neighborhood in Santiago, Chile. The air was thick with the scent of roasted corn, stray dogs lounged in the afternoon sun, and the murmur of life drifted through half-open windows. Pedro hadn't been back in years. He was here for rest, not fame. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. He paused at a corner where a small crowd had gathered. Someone was playing music, a hauntingly beautiful melody that stopped Pedro in his tracks. The kind of tune that tugs at something old inside you. The kind of tune you don't realize you remember until it plays again. The musician was older, sitting cross-legged on a frayed blanket. His guitar was scratched, well-worn. His beard was gray, his coat patched, and yet his fingers danced over the strings like they remembered a better life. But it wasn't the man Pedro was focused on. It was the song. That melody. It flooded him with memories. A dusty room, a broken radio, a lullaby his mother used to hum while folding laundry. It was his childhood, wrapped in chords and strummed in a foreign alley. Pedro's breath caught in his throat. He approached slowly, heart thudding. The man didn't look up, just kept playing. Pedro dropped a note into the open guitar case and knelt beside him. "Where did you learn that?" he asked softly. The man's hand stopped. He looked up, his eyes clouded but sharp. "Didn't learn it, wrote it." The street noise dimmed in Pedro's ears. "What's your name?" he asked. The man gave a crooked smile. "They call me Angel, but once I had a different name." Something about the way he said it made Pedro shiver. This wasn't just nostalgia. This was personal. And somewhere deep inside, Pedro knew this wasn't a coincidence. This was a story waiting to be told. The next morning, Pedro returned to the alley, but Angel was gone. The blanket was still there, folded and tucked behind a rusted dumpster. But the guitar case had vanished. Pedro looked around, hoping it was just a break. Hours passed. Nothing. Frustrated, Pedro slipped into a nearby cafe, ordering a cortado with little enthusiasm. His mind raced, not with fame or scripts, but with the song. How could that man claim to have written it? That lullaby belonged to Pedro's mother. She'd sung it countless nights, even after the lights were out, humming it into the dark like it was stitched to her soul. And now a stranger claimed it was his? He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. A quick call, then another. By nightfall, Pedro was seated in a quiet room with his cousin, Camilla, a history teacher with a memory like a vault and a heart twice as big. He played her a recording he'd captured of Angel's song. Her eyes widened instantly. "That's Tia Sophia's lullaby," she said. "I know, but the man said he wrote it." Camilla frowned. "Did he give you his real name?" "He said he once had a different one." A long pause followed. Camilla got up, pulled a photo album from a shelf, and flipped it open. Pages of dusty, smiling faces. Then she stopped at a faded black and white image. A young man, guitar in hand, a familiar smirk. "Is this him?" she asked. Pedro leaned in, his breath caught. Yes, it was Angel, only decades younger. "That's Martin, Sophia's younger brother." Pedro blinked. "My mom had a brother?" Camila nodded solemnly. "They were close, until he vanished. Left after an argument with your grandfather. About music, about freedom. I'm not sure. No one saw him again? Some said he died. Others just stopped asking." Pedro sat in stunned silence. He had grown up with stories of rebellion and resilience, but never once had Martin been mentioned. And now a homeless man in an alley claimed to have written a lullaby passed through generations. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was blood. He left Camilla's house with the photograph tucked safely in his coat. He had to find Angel, Martin, again. The next few days became a search. Pedro combed the streets, asking vendors, shopkeepers, anyone who might have seen the old man with the guitar. No one had a name, but they all remembered the music. "He plays only when it rains," one woman told him. "He sleeps behind the cinema," said another. Pedro waited, and one night as the rain gently pattered on the cobblestones, he heard it again. That same melody. It echoed like memory itself, curling between alley walls and rising toward the dark sky. Pedro followed the sound like a child chasing a dream, heart pounding, the photograph gripped in his hand. He turned the corner, and there he was. Sitting on his blanket, guitar in lap, eyes closed, singing softly into the night. Pedro approached slowly. "You wrote that song," he said. Angel opened his eyes, nodding once. "I think you're my uncle," Pedro whispered, holding out the photo. For a long moment, the old man stared. His weathered face tightened. A flicker of recognition danced in his eyes. His hand trembled as he reached for the picture. "I was Martin," he said quietly, "before I gave up everything." Pedro sat beside him, not as an actor or a star, but as a nephew, seeking a family he never knew he'd lost. The rain fell softly around them, the melody continuing as though it had never truly stopped. The next morning, Pedro arrived with coffee and 2 fresh empanadas. Martin, once known on the street as Angel, was already sitting upright, carefully tuning his guitar, each string resonating with a familiar, trembling warmth. They hadn't said much after their reunion. Words were scarce, but the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with emotion, with recognition, with the slow unwinding of decades lost to time and regret. Pedro handed him the coffee. Martin's hand shook as he held it. "Milk and sugar," Pedro smiled. "Like Mama used to make it." Martin looked up. His eyes were glassy, the kind of tired that sleep never fixes. "I thought she'd forgotten me," he said after a moment. "After what I did, after I left." Pedro shook his head. "She never told me about you, but she sang that song every night, your song." Martin looked away. "I wrote it the night I left. I was angry at our father. He wanted me to give up music, to work at the docks, but I couldn't. I thought if I stayed, I'd die a quiet death. So I ran, but I wrote that song for Sophia, to remember me." He picked up the guitar and strummed the melody slowly, each note aching with memory. "She must have kept it," he whispered. "Made it hers." Pedro watched, awed by the fragility in Martin's face. Not just age, but decades of weathered loneliness. Regrets shaped the lines around his mouth, but music still lived in his fingers. Pedro made a decision that morning. He reached into his coat and pulled out a slim envelope. Inside was an invitation to a private event, a small concert being held at a local cultural center, a fundraiser for community arts. "I want you to play," Pedro said. Martin laughed, a dry, broken sound. "Look at me, Pedro. I haven't been on a stage in 40 years. I don't even have a name people remember." "You have mine," Pedro said. "And hers. That's enough." 2 weeks later, the concert hall buzzed with quiet anticipation. It was a modest venue, a small theater, not built for glamour, but for intimacy. Pedro had personally arranged everything: the lighting, the chairs, the quiet little flyer that simply read, "An evening with Martin, songs remembered," presented by Pedro Pascal. Backstage, Martin stood frozen, staring at the red curtain. He wore a pressed shirt and clean jeans. His guitar, gently restored, hung around his shoulders like an old friend finally returning home. Pedro came up behind him. "You okay?" Martin nodded slowly. "I feel like I'm dreaming." Pedro smiled. "That's how I feel every time I walk out there." The curtain rose. A single spotlight lit the small stage, and Martin stepped out, blinking into the light, his silhouette outlined by the soft glow. There was no grand applause, just respectful silence. And then, a single note from the guitar. Then another. Then the melody, the lullaby, rose into the air. Soft, haunting, familiar. Martin closed his eyes and sang, and Pedro, sitting in the front row, felt time bend. He could see his mother again, young and bright, humming that tune as she folded laundry, or stirred soup, or held his hand through nightmares. But now the song had a face, a story, a name. When the final note faded, the audience remained still, spellbound. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, not wild, but deeply real. Pedro stood and embraced Martin as he exited the stage. No cameras, no press, just family. Weeks later, Martin moved into a small guest house on Pedro's property, away from the cold alleys and nights of isolation. He began teaching music to neighborhood kids. The melody, his melody, found a second life in their young fingers and voices. Pedro even recorded a short documentary about Martin's life, weaving it between faded photographs, old cassette recordings, and the final concert. It wasn't made for awards. It was made for memory. One night, as the sun set behind the hills, Pedro joined Martin in the garden. The old man sat strumming a new song, still unfinished, but full of light. "Who's that one for?" Pedro asked. Martin grinned. "For the next one who feels forgotten." If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video to honor the forgotten voices behind every melody. Comment below, have you ever heard a song that brought back a memory? Share this with someone who believes music can heal more than just the heart. And don't forget to subscribe for more true inspired tales where kindness, memory, and unexpected heroes take center stage. Sometimes a simple tune can bring a family back together. Let's make sure stories like these are never forgotten.